Welcome to the Shorten Anime channel. Today we'll dive into the latest episode of The Great Ruler. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support the channel. The Great Ruler Season 1, Episode 22. Black Eerie Swamp? Mu Chen was slightly surprised when he heard this name. He immediately smacked his lips. So it was actually in that place. Black Eerie Swamp. It is an extremely vicious land within the Northern Spiritual Realm. However, it is quite different than the Northern Spiritual Field. At least in the Northern Spiritual Field, adventurer teams would often head there. As for the Black Eerie Swamp, it is almost a forbidden land within the Northern Spiritual Realm. During these few years, 9 out of 10 individuals would become fertilizer for that land. As for the remaining ones, they would be able to make it out. Yet he would become out of his mind and require an extremely long period of time to recover from it. Even when they come out, they would still be afraid when they hear the name, Black Eerie Swamp. The Black Eerie Swamp isn't easy to venture in. Zhou Ye frowned. It was obvious that he was quite knowledgeable about the Black Eerie Swamp. This swamp was known to be extremely dangerous. The slightest mistake could take away their life. If it is for the Nine Netherworld Bird, it is worth risking it. And if we really let the Liu territory obtain the Nine Netherworld Bird, it would be quite troublesome for us, Mu Feng muttered. Zhou Ye nodded. The Nine Netherworld Bird was just too powerful. If it was during its prime, nobody in the Northern Spiritual Realm would even dare to hunt it. But based on what was seen, the Nine Netherworld Bird probably failed its evolution and was in the period where it was weakest. Therefore, the Liu territory would not give up on this opportunity. What should we do? Mu Feng thought for a while and said, let's first send out some decent men to monitor the Liu territory's movements. This matter must be kept secret. Otherwise, many forces would be jealous when this information spreads out. Thus, the Liu territory would not dare to act on a grand scale publicly and would only do this in secret. The Black Eerie Swamp has a deathly miasma enshrouding it back then. It will only weaken during the height of summer every year. From what I see, that day isn't far away. If the Liu territory is to move, they will definitely select that time, Zhou Ye said. Mu Feng also nodded his head and muttered, we should also secretly recruit for men. Once there's an opportunity, we will also take action. Even if we fail to obtain the Nine Netherworld Bird, we must make the Liu territory return empty-handed. With the hostile relationship that the Liu territory and Mu territory harbored, it would be a good thing if they managed to stop the other side from doing as they wish. Okay, I'll go prepare right now. Zhou Ye has always done things swiftly. He immediately replied and darted away without the slightest indecisiveness. Mu Feng watched Zhou Ye's departing figure and smiled. Then he patted Mu Chen's head. You brat, you sure brought back a big gift to your father. Dad, bring me to the Black Eerie Swamp as well. Mu Chen smiled and said, that place is too dangerous. It's not suitable for you. Mu Feng frowned. I came out of the spiritual road, okay? Dad, the situation there probably isn't any better than the Black Eerie Swamp. Mu Chen gently smiled and said. Mu Feng hesitated before carefully looking at the handsome face in front of him. Although it held a slight trace of immature due to his age, it already has an unswerving determination in it. He was slightly dazed. The boy that he had single-handedly brought up has unknowingly grown a lot. Since you want to do this, then you can follow us. However, you have to remember not to act reckless. Mu Feng smiled and was somewhat pleased. This son of his will probably soon surpass him, his father. Mu Chen nodded. Then he smiled as he stared at Mu Feng and said, also, there is something that I have to trouble Dad to solve my doubts. What? Mu Feng asked, puzzled. It's about me. Mu Chen helplessly shrugged his shoulders and said, ever since I trained in the great Pagoda Art, I felt that something seems to be hiding within my body. Dad, can you explain it to me? Mu Feng was stunned and immediately let out a smile. There was something like this? Mu Chen only stared at Mu Feng. Based on his understanding of his father, the more he acted calm, the more complicated the matter was. Dad, you can't keep hiding it from me forever, right? Mu Feng looked at the serious and persistent eyes of Mu Chen. His smile gradually faded away after a while and he revealed a bitter smile. I never thought that you would notice it this quickly. I originally thought that it would take at least another 6 months. It's useless for you to ask me about that since it was done by your mother. That's within my expectations. With Dad's strength, It's probably impossible for you to do this. Mu Chen was not surprised at this answer and smiled. Damn, brat, you really want to get spanked. Mu Feng's face turned red. He was actually looked down by his own son. What did mother do to me? Mu Chen lowered his head and stared at his own body as he asked in confusion. Because you are your mother's own son, your body possesses her blood. Therefore, she arranged a sealing array in your body when you were born. This is also why you cannot detect your spiritual pulse after all these years, Mu Feng explained. My spiritual pulse was sealed by my mother? Why? Mu Chen muttered in surprise. He had always thought that he did not possess a spiritual pulse. He never imagined that. It was actually sealed by his mother. There are two reasons. Although a spiritual pulse can improve your cultivation speed rapidly, it would sometimes become an obstacle if you are too much of a genius. In order for you to genuinely become a powerhouse, you must also possess a heart that matches this talent. In this world, there are many geniuses, but how many of them could be truly viewed as a hero amongst them? Mu Feng smiled faintly and said, You have also heard about the heavenly sovereigns that broke through the shackles of the lower planes and entered the great thousand world. These people are truly powerful individuals. They possess an unshakable resolve, and for you to be able to rival them, you must also have such disposition. Then what about the other reason? Mu Chen nodded and asked, As for the other, Mu Feng gave a wry smile and spoke. If your mother did not seal your spiritual pulse, the two of us would probably be quite troubled. You might not be able to smoothly grow up. Mu Chen frowned. What do you mean? I told you what I should have told you, but something you don't have to know now. Mu Feng shook his head and seriously looked at Mu Chen. You only need to know that your mother did this to protect you. And you cannot act reckless. Your mother paid a great price for you, so you must not touch the seal within your body before you have sufficient strength. Mu Feng's expression suddenly became strict. Mother, Mu Chen muttered to himself. His hand gently touched his chest. This word seemed to emit a warm feeling from within his soul. Although he had never seen the gentle figure within his heart, he still felt a sense of familiarity due to the blood that they shared. Just what happened when he was young that separated their family. It made him, when he was still an infant, unable to see the gentle figure clearly. When you become strong, you will naturally know everything. Mu Feng patted Mu Chen's shoulder and said, Then when will I be able to remove the seal within my body? Mu Chen hesitated for a moment and asked, Remove? How could it be that easy to remove the seal that your mother has left behind? However, she has already handed the key over to you. As long as you have the ability, you will be able to gradually remove it. Mu Feng smiled. Key? Mu Chen's eyes flashed. Is it the Great Pagoda Art? Yes. Mu Feng nodded and said, When your Great Pagoda Art reaches the tower form level, you should be able to remove the seal set up by your mother. Tower form? Mu Chen's mouth twitched. He had personally experienced how difficult it was to train in the Great Pagoda Art. He really did not know how long it'll take for him to reach the highest level. Moreover, you should also try to understand about spiritual arrays during this period of time. I'll find a spiritual array master to teach you a bit. Mu Feng suddenly said, Spiritual array? Mu Chen was stunned. He immediately rubbed his head and said, I never learned it. Dad, you want me to be a spiritual array master as well? Your mother was extremely accomplished in it. As her son, you must know a bit, right? Otherwise, your mother would blame me for not teaching you properly when you two meet. Therefore, you should work hard. Mu Feng smiled as he rubbed Mu Chen's head. Then he slowly walked out of the living room and left behind a slightly depressed Mu Chen. Just how would it be easy to be a spiritual array master? His mother knew how to do everything. But if she was this brilliant, why would she fancy Dad? Apparently, it was not a joke when Mu Feng said that he wanted Mu Chen to learn about spiritual arrays. Therefore, Mu Chen met the old spiritual array master that Mu Feng brought back on the following day. It was a somewhat skinny, middle-aged man dressed in white robes. He looked extremely strict and his face did not have the slightest smile. Although he was Mu Feng's subordinate, he did not show much respect or modesty when he saw Mu Feng. Instead, he maintained neither an humble nor arrogant expression. This is Mr. Wenling. He will teach you the basic knowledge of spiritual arrays from now on. Mu Feng pointed at the middle-aged man beside him and directed a smile towards Mu Chen. Mu Chen meets Mr. Wenling. Mu Chen cuffed his hand to salute. He did not display the appearance of a little lord and looked extremely humble. The middle-aged man named Wenling gently nodded, yet he did not say any words. Boy, you have to work hard. as Mr. Wenling is famous for being strict. He will not teach you if you're not talented enough, even if you're my son. Do you understand? Mu Feng cautioned him. Wenling could be considered as someone that he invited to the Mu territory. Although he was only a rank 1 spiritual array master, there were no more than 10 of them within the Mu territory. Moreover, Wenling was considered to be the strongest one. Mu Chen nodded his head. The Northern Spiritual Academy did not have a course regarding about spiritual arrays, and they did not specially invite spiritual array masters over. Normal individuals would not be able to invite a spiritual array master to teach them. Thus, it made the spiritual array masters rather scarce within the Northern spiritual realm. Perhaps after entering the 5 great academies, you would be able to get professional training regarding about spiritual arrays. However, you can only learn the basics in the Northern spiritual realm. Then you should follow Mr. Wenling and learn. I have something else to do. Mu Feng was not worried about his own son. With Mu Chen's sensibility, he would not do anything that would make the teacher run away in anger. Therefore, he left while being rest assured. The matter regarding about the Nine Netherworld Bird made Mu Feng quite busy recently, as he had to watch the Lu territory's movements at all times. Mister, please sit. Mu Chen directed a smile towards Wenling when he saw Mu Feng leaving. Wenling nodded. He sat down and was silent for a moment. Afterwards, his stern face looked at Mu Chen and he asked, I heard from the Mu territory lord that you fought against Jizong. It was evident that Mu Chen didn't expect Wenling to suddenly ask about this. He was stunned for a moment before nodding his head. Then do you know what spiritual arrays that Jizong arranged against you? Wenling asked again. It should be 2 spiritual arrays, a consciousness mesmerizing array to trap me and a spiritual rain array to attack me. Mu Chen thought for a moment and replied, both of them are not complicated. Rank 1 spiritual arrays. It seems that Jisong was afraid of your father, so he did not directly kill you. Wenling said, based on my understanding, the strongest array that Jisong can arrange should be the murdering blood shower array and is comparable to a rank 2 spiritual array. Once it was activated, even a spiritual rotation stage late phase would be extremely helpless. Mu Chen scratched his head. It seems that he won because of luck. However, it is also not easy for you to break through the 2 spiritual arrays with your strength. Wenling stared at Mu Chen and nodded his head slightly. A hint of appreciation appeared on his emotionless face. We'll talk a bit about spiritual arrays now. Wenling waved his head and said, the so-called spiritual array is simply a special method of resonating spiritual energy. It will activate the spiritual aura within the world, affecting both offensive and defensive measures. However, it is rather complex and difficult if you want to trigger this sort of resonance. In a few lower planes, it is easy to arrange spiritual arrays. This is because the energy there isn't as rich and complicated compared to the Great Thousand World. Therefore, the Great Thousand World's spiritual arrays are more advanced and complex compared to the ones at the lower planes. Wenling extended his hand out. His hand seemed to be particularly slender and was completely different than his ordinary appearance. Mu Chen stared at his palm and noticed that spiritual energy was gathering quickly at his fingertips. Finally, it turned into 5 exquisite spiritual seals. The spiritual seals seemed to be quite complex, but it emitted a special fluctuation. Around the 5 spiritual seals, the spiritual aura from the world seemed to be overturning quietly. This is a spiritual seal. It is an essential item for arranging spiritual arrays. Spiritual seal? Mu Chen was startled. It was apparent that he was unfamiliar about this thing. Yes, Wenling nodded. He flicked his fingers, and the 5 spiritual arrays escaped his hand and flew out. It seemed to have fused with the raindrops from the sea and faded away. However, when the spiritual seals disappeared, Mu Chen suddenly felt a fierce and unexpected wind blowing, causing his body to be slightly shaky. Mu Chen exclaimed, and his eyes became serious. He was able to see faintly that the air in front of him was slightly distorted. Light beams that were difficult to be seen with the naked eye seemed to be intertwining, and at the source of the light beams, it was the 5 tiny spiritual seals. Is this a spiritual array? Wenling nodded and said, this is just a tiny spiritual array. It is not considered even a rank 1 spiritual array. Arranging a spiritual array requires absolute control over the spiritual seals. Any slight fluctuation and abnormal resonance would cause the spiritual arrays to fail. When the spiritual arrays fail, the spiritual energy will cause a backlash to the user. In serious cases, they would lose their lives. This is because this failure is like losing control over your spiritual array, and it will cause a heavy blow to the user. Generally speaking, the more powerful the spiritual array is, the more spiritual seals you would require. At the same time, the difficulty for manipulating it will become harder. Wenling said, "I am a rank 1 spiritual array master. My utmost limit is controlling 20 spiritual seals at once. If I add any more, I'll lose control over them. Based on my knowledge, the number of rank 5 spiritual array masters could be counted in one hand. They are able to manipulate over hundreds of spiritual seals, and this power could even exterminate spirit stage powerhouses." Muchen secretly clucked his tongue when he heard this. Spiritual seals are the foundations of arranging a spiritual array. Aside from that, you require another essential item. What? Diagram array. Wenling faintly spoke. Forming an array is extremely difficult. It is equivalent to a large-scale construction project. The spiritual seals are like cornerstone in the paths of connection. On the other hand, the diagram array is like the design. Without a complete design, it would be impossible for the construction to start. Wenling's hands entered his own arms, and he slowly pulled out an emerald jaded script. On the jaded script, a faint light flashed. This is a rank 1 spiritual array scroll. Its name is the Spiritual Lightning Array. Muchen accepted it with curiosity and unraveled it. Light instantly entered his eyes, and he could see light beams that would make others dizzy on the diagram array. These light beams intertwined complicatedly and finally formed into a flashing, yet faint lightning array. A diagram array could be considered to be the most attractive item for a spiritual array. Whenever a high-rank diagram array appears, it would definitely attract many spiritual array masters to seize it. And diagram arrays are also like spiritual array masters. It is divided into 9 ranks. After all these years, the highest-ranked diagram array I've seen is only a rank 4 diagram array. When Wenling talked about the rank 4 diagram array, his strict face was filled with envy and longing. Of course, a diagram array is still too early for you now. Wenling stared at Muchen and handed another jaded script to him as he said, "Inside of this, there is the method of cultivating spiritual seals. See if you can cultivate it out. From a certain extent, this could be considered as a test for beginners. If you are able to feel that you're clumsy and slow when cultivating, then you can stop. This means that you are not sensitive to your spiritual seals. In other words, it means you do not have the talent for this." Muchen heard this and accepted the jaded script. He did not say anything more and closed his eyes as he accepted the cultivation method for spiritual seals from within the jaded script. Muchen closed his eyes for approximately an hour. Then he slowly opened his eyes and put down the jaded script within his hand. His eyes showed pondering and thinking. Cultivating the spiritual seal was quite similar to the limitless death seal. However, it was not as complicated. This is definitely not because becoming a spiritual array master was easier than training in the limitless death seal. After all, the amount of spiritual seals that a spiritual array master would manipulate far surpasses the amount of limitless death seals. Could the 2 limitless death seals that Muchen was able to condense face 20 spiritual seals, or maybe even 200 spiritual seals? It was obvious which one was harder in condensing and manipulating. Muchen thought for a moment and finally opened his eyes again. His hand stretched out and a dark black spiritual flickered at his fingertips. As the lights flickered, he was attempting to cultivate a spiritual seal. Wenling's eyes stared calmly at Muchen as Muchen began to attempt to cultivate a spiritual seal. If the latter fails the very first test, there was no need for him to teach him any longer. It would only waste both of their times. That wraps up the content for today's episode. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel to get notifications for the next episode. For now, goodbye, and see you next time.